Okay, let me see. All right. Assalamualaikum and a very good afternoon, everyone. At the time of recording, it's around 12 in the afternoon. I will share with you my slides so you can see. Um, Okay, so in today's class, in this recording, we're going to cover what is the economics of social protection. This is week 2 in our semester, and what will be covered in this topic is first and foremost the evolution of social protection. So we will see how the idea of social protection, while it has been in existence for a very long time, it has been formalized in the 90s, and we see chronologically how things have changed over the years. We'll also see social protection instruments, the way in which social protection are being delivered to different groups of people. And then approaches to social protection is basically the framework that governments and institutions adopt in delivering social protection to the communities. And as well as we look at different social protection systems in countries. Okay, so moving to the first subtopic, which is the concept of social protection. Social protection is used vis-a-vis with social security, but what is social protection really is, it is a set of policies and programs that is designed to reduce poverty and vulnerability by promoting efficient labor markets, diminishing people's exposure to risks, and enhancing their capacity to protect themselves against hazards and interruptions or loss of income. So this is the standard definition that's being used in Asian Development Bank, but it has also adopted across many Asian countries across the continent. And I've mentioned this in our first class, how social protection shouldn't be seen as a welfare mechanism. Rather, it is a tool that specifically are put in place to ensure that every person in society can participate in the economy. So in a world filled with risks, social protection systems actually help individuals and families, especially the poor and the vulnerable, to cope with crises and shocks, whether they would like to be employed and to invest in their health and education of their children, as well as to protect the aging population. And this is more so important given the increasing living costs that we are facing, the changing economies around the world, and the aging of our population. So, Social Security, and this is adopted in Article 22 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, in that they also include Social Security as a human right. This is further complemented by the ILO's flagship Convention 102 in 1952, and then in Recommendation 202 in year 2012 also reaffirms what is the human right to social security. Okay, so social security is what is the protection that is provided by and to society. You can see it being two-pronged. One is from the financial support angle, which is to compensate for the loss of income and covers healthcare expenditures. The other one is to ensure there is access to services by way of facilitating access to social services that can fulfill basic needs. So this would come into fruition to what is called as social transfers. Now, the social transfer, as you can see in this slide, the typology goes into two different branches. One is contributory and one is non-contributory. Contributory would also be branched into what is compulsory and voluntary. Compulsory is what we would see in Malaysia in the likes of SOCSO, especially those who work in the formal sector. You have to contribute a portion of your pay to SOCSO, which is a form of insurance. And in the event that you are faced with certain shocks, you can claim your right to the social insurance. There's also the voluntary branch, which is an extension of social insurance and mainly this would focus to informal sector. There's also what is termed as micro insurance. For the Malaysians in our group, I think you would appreciate it. When you read the newspaper, we're talking about the Peka insurance, the Tenang insurance provided by insurance companies. This would fall under micro insurance, where the premium are capped at a small or limited amount. And then looking at the non-contributory branch also would look at two different branches. One is targeted social assistance and one is what is universal schemes, which is more available in developed countries. So for more information, I would really suggest you to go to this link. If it doesn't come up, please let me know on our WhatsApp group. So that covers our first subtopic. We move on to the next subtopic, which is the evolution of social protection. So like I mentioned, you would see how the epistemology of formal social protection happens. So social protection actually is there, I mean, has been there for the longest time. And I think when, in particular in one angle that I'm very much interested in looking at is retirement, where it's being provided as early as the 1800s, 1900s in Europe. But the formalization actually happened in the 1990s in the form of safety nets. Safety nets emerged in 1990s as a basic support for the most poor and vulnerable. This is seen in the provision of limited cash transfers to a very small group of people living in extreme poverty. And the emergence of safety nets followed policies in the 50s and 70s that focused on ensuring food security, especially in the US, where they use food stamps and use food reserves and price subsidies, for example. And then in 2001, you look at what is social risk management, where the World Bank actually developed the SRM as a conceptual approach to social protection. So this really gave governments a framework to build their social protection policies from. They look at public interventions that firstly assist individuals, households, and communities to better manage risk and to provide support, especially for the extreme poor. Now, when you compare that to safety nets, this actually further formalized and expanded what is social protection. And then moving on, 3 years later, the Transformative Social Protection, the TSP, was developed by the Center for Social Protection. It is a response to existing social protection policies and suggests that social protection should not just merely address symptoms of poverty, but also tackle structural causes of poverty and inequality. So this extends whatever that was there in the beginning. It's just that it aims to also solve the root cause of the problem. So transformative social protection looks at addressing causes of poverty and vulnerability by focusing on legal frameworks, regulatory frameworks, and also how these policies and programs are delivered to the communities that need them. And then fast forward to 2011, the ILO started the Initiative on Social Protection Law, which you can consider as it being the operationalization of rights-based approach to social protection, meaning everyone is entitled to it. It means that everyone in need should have access to some kind of income security and healthcare. So, as mentioned in the previous slides, the SPF was formalized in the ILO Social Protection Floor's recommendation in 2012. Okay, so these documents are all available online, and I believe I've also listed them in our course information sheet. So you're more than welcome to go and find these documents and have a read yourselves. And then in 2012, again, three important international stakeholders in social protection published the new strategy documents to, further shed light on their approach to social protection. UNICEF, for one, produced the UNICEF Social Protection Strategic Framework, which focused on integrated systems that would work for children, because UNICEF's mandate is especially for the care and protection of children. The World Bank Social Protection and Labour Strategy, which is a 10-year roadmap, looks at efforts to promote resilience and improve productivity of individuals within a society. The European Commission published what is a communication paper regarding the role of social protection in the EU development cooperation, emphasizing how social protection is actually important for inclusive growth and development. In 2015, you see the SDGs being formulated, and it has firmly placed social protection at the heart of social and development policy. Social protection is mentioned explicitly as part of the 5 goals, most notably in relation to reducing poverty and inequality. So this, we look at SDG 1 and SDG 10. So this actually presents as an important extension to the Millennium Development Goals, which did not refer to social protection previously. So this further solidifies the importance of social protection as a pillar to the economy. So in 2016, you see the Universal Social Protection. The Global Partnership for Universal Social Protection 2030 was established in 2016 by the ILO and World Bank, with many other supranational organizations. It looks at to increase the number of countries that provide universal social protection, and it seeks to support countries to design and implement universal and sustainable social protection systems, and it join efforts with international agencies, donors, and governments to provide social protection coverage for everyone. So basically, the Global Partnership for Universal Protection looks at ensuring that everyone, regardless of which country you are in, would receive what is called universal social protection. As such, it builds on the work of the whatever promulgated frameworks in the years before, which includes the SPF and the SDG. So in 2019, just shy of the COVID era, both World Bank and UNICEF published updated reports on their approach to social protection. This is more so in due to the changing work and living conditions, especially given more precarious jobs and greater exposure to climate shocks and conflicts are happening around us. So in that report, the World Bank argues that social protection needs to move away from the model of providing social security through formal employment, but to also recognize and adapt to widespread informality in the labor market, especially in many low and middle income countries, and greater volatility in the job market in high-income countries. So in that framework, UNICEF zooms into the interaction between economic and social vulnerabilities and the need for social protection to engage with both. Systems of social protection should be able to be responsive to shocks, meaning as and when something happens, that is where social protection comes into place, right in time, and the provision would be adequate. It also means that they can extend coverage and provide more intense support when large shocks happen. In our country at the time, in 2004, you see when the tsunami happened, the social protection deliverables were in not in unorganized manner. So social security extension. So if you would see in this graph, if you see here in the slide, the coverage is there are gaps in the coverage of social protection across the society, where limited is given to the poor, but the level of protection is quite high for the formal sector. And there are people proposing for new and more adaptive ways to ensure that every member of society is covered in some way or the other. Okay. So at the moment, you see, especially in low income and middle income countries like Malaysia, social protection programs are scattered and sometimes overlapping. Coverage through micro insurance is also limited. And some programs target only the poorest, leaving everyone else uncovered. So in Malaysia, you see there are around, in one of the papers that I read, I'm sure this has been updated somewhere, there are 120 programs across 20 ministries and government agencies in Malaysia. And sometimes the programs overlap each other, and sometimes there are also gaps in societies that are not covered. So that's a problem that many policymakers need to tackle and are in the process of tackling as we speak. So this is what a social protection flaw would look at, in that it would be there to provide a minimum level of social security for everyone in the society, and for people to build on from that flaw. Okay. As you can see in the orange box, the lighter orange box, how people can actually build on from the nationally defined social protection flaw. But regardless, there will be some kind of a trampoline to ensure that when you fall through the cracks, there are opportunities for you to bounce back from the shocks that you face. Okay. So this is the social protection framework in Cambodia, I think. So, the idea of a social protection flaw was endorsed by as many as 185 member states of the ILO in June 2012, with the adoption of the social protection flaw recommendation number 202. So, as many as 456 voted yes for this recommendation. It also builds on four guarantees, where number one in is social protection flaw framework by ILO. Number one, all residents would have access to essential healthcare. Number two, every children would be able to enjoy some sort of a income security through transfers in cash or kind. So in kind, you would see in terms of in Malaysia, they give what is the food assistance, they get milk. So that would be related to access to nutrition and free education and care. So number three, all those in active age groups who cannot earn sufficient income would also be supplemented by a basic income security, especially for those inflicted with sickness, unemployment, maternity, and disability. All residents in old age and with disabilities would have income security also through pensions or transfers in kind. So, this would cover everyone, all members across the income spectrum in a society, where you would see the green would be the floor, and then people would build on from the floor through mandatory social insurance and social security benefits, and then through voluntary insurance to ensure that while coverage is there, adequacy is also answered through this mechanism. Okay, so that covers our second subtopic. We'll move on to our third subtopic, which is approaches to social protection. So there are four approaches to social protection. We will look at it one by one being social risk management. The other is what we discussed in terms of the social protection flaw, and then transformative social protection, and then life cycle approach. So these approaches are the philosophies or concepts that organizations and governments adapt and adopt when designing social protection policies. So we'll look at it at the first one. So one is social risk management. So it consists of public interventions that looks to assist individuals, households, and communities to better manage risk and to provide support for the critically poor. So you see, they divide groups by perspective. One is through individual, the other is through groups, and the last one is through looking at whole regions or nations. And they look at risk affecting, from the angle of natural, health, social, economic, political, environmental. And they see how to park different type of social protection deliverables according to the risk that people are faced with. So the strategies for managing risk, one looks at prevention, which is reducing the probability of a risk occurring. The other one is mitigation, reducing the potential impact should a risk were to occur. And then coping, meaning managing the effects of the risk after it has happened. So one is before, during, and after, if you can look at it from that way. Another approach is social protection flaw, which has been discussed earlier. As mentioned, social protection flaw are nationally defined sets of basic social security guarantees that should ensure, as a minimum, that over the life cycle, meaning from birth to death, All in it have access to essential healthcare and to basic income security, which together secure effective access to goods and services defined as necessary at the national level. So you can read the 4 essential guarantees through the life cycle here, in that all residents will have access to essential healthcare. All children would have income security, as mentioned just now. All those in active age should enjoy income security through social assistance transfer, and all residents in old age are well taken care of. This were mentioned just now. This is also mentioned where you would have the floor that would be extended to everyone in a society, and then people build up from there to ensure that their needs are well taken care of, and it's the savings or assistance that they need are adequate. So, despite that, not one size would fit all. It's not a one size fit all approach when talking about social protection law, in that each country would have their own definition of benefits that they can provide. So each country also must decide how to do it. Some countries do universal scheme, some do targeted social assistance, social insurance, and a combination of these three. So the social protection floor as a social protection deliverable is actually an investment. As I mentioned, it is a pillar to the economy where you see the ripple effect of having a social protection floor. We see number one, it increases household consumption. And the direct effect is you would see the decreasing poverty and inequality rate among people, which would then, when you increase household consumption, there will be increasing demand for goods and services, and it will be good for the overall economic performance. You also see behavioral effects in the betterment of education and training of individuals, better health, better child well-being, and better livelihood and productive investments as well as labor. And this would feed into better human capital in an economy, and that would drive labor productivity and again feed to the economic performance. So really, it is an investment rather than what is people call welfare tool. So, and then another perspective is the transformative social protection, which looks at to transform the society to become participants of society. This is through provision of cash or food transfer to the poor, protection of vulnerable against livelihood risk, and enhancement of social status and rights of the excluded and marginalized. So you can read here, it moves from protection to prevention, promotion, and transformation, being the final stage, the final aim of a good social protection policy. It moves from in protection, you would arrive to social assistance. In prevention, you would look at social insurance. In preventing shocks, and then livelihood promotion looks at linkages, to making poor people are lifted out from poverty. And there's also social justice when looking at transformation. Okay, so and then this the angle of life cycle approach, which looked at from birth to death approach. It focuses on different stages throughout a person's life and the specific needs and vulnerabilities at the different stages. We look at, for infants, they would need free health insurance, things like child grant to get necessity items, goods and services that are suited for infants. And when individuals move to the school age stage, they will need child grants, scholarships, and school feeding programs. And then as and when they move to the youth stage, they would need scholarships to further their studies. And then when they join the labor sector, they will need unemployment insurance, public work. And then when they retire, it's more towards having a good social pension. So really from this approach, social protection is a set of transfers and services that are provided by government and organizations to help individuals and households to confront risks that they face at each stage of their lives and ensure that a minimum standard of dignity and well-being are kept throughout their life from birth to death. Okay. So this is taken from one of Bank Negara's. I know one of our students is from Bank Negara, so maybe you can help enlighten us when we meet. This is taken from one of the box articles from a Bank Negara annual report, if I'm not mistaken, how each policy would fit into different stages in a person's life. Okay, so that wraps up the different approaches to social protection, and we move to social protection systems. Now, social protection system refers to a combination of policies and programs that we, as a society call social protection in a country. So this would run from social assistance, social insurance, and labor market interventions and policies. Normally, it refers to formal and government implemented policies, but there are also instances where NGOs and other organizations would come into play. The features of a social protection system looks at number one, inclusiveness, making sure that everyone is included and covered across the life cycle. Adequacy, sorry, looks at the system that provides regular and predictable support that is an adequate response to people's needs. Sustainability is the financial resources that are allocated in and aligned with desired outcomes and the country's socio-economic development. This is where I always say how every people in a society should be equal, but should be participatory in the economy. Coherence in that policies and programs fit together both within social protection system and with other sectors, and responsiveness in that the system can evolve and adapt according to context that is changing. So this is the typology of social protection system. I will not elaborate much on this. I believe you can read it on your own. So there are different types of social protection across the world. We look at firstly consolidate. Consolidate is when social protection is institutionalized national domestic budgets and political processes, as well as linked to formal labor market. So you see this mainly in high income developed countries such as in Europe and Northern America. Emerging social protection looks at wide differences in specific models for emerging social protection. But usually international assistance like IMF and all that would play a very minor role in funding their setup because most are domestically funded. The main focus is on expanding social protection, particularly formal contributory social security. So these are when people are starting to build the social protection framework. And you'll see this in emerging economies like in Southeast Asia, Middle East, and Latin America. And then you have what is the limited social protection, and these are mainly focused on low-income countries, in that the type of social protection is found in countries where the need for social protection is high, but their fiscal capacity is limited. So the social safety nets are mainly donor funded, and basic longer term social protection are slowly scaled up and very limited in terms of its provision. So you see the layers of social protection here. Again, I think this is what you can read based on the documents that I have shared with you in our course information. So, and then we look at social protection instruments. There are three basic instruments in the social protection, but not necessarily they are narrowed down to three. There are more, but generally we will discuss these three. One is social assistance, the other is social insurance, and finally there are labor market programs. So social assistance are programs that provide support. They are often only provided to those living in poverty or low-income households, and they are there to tag back to the protection of people against poverty and provide some kind of a minimum support. So social assistance are non-contributory mechanism, meaning you do not have to pay into the scheme to actually benefit from it. So you would see this in terms of child benefits, school feeding programs, and social pensions. So there are a number of social assistance programs by program types. So I think this is not in Malaysia. I think this is in the US, if I'm not mistaken. I believe so. So, unconditional cash transfer programs are the most common form of social assistance, followed by in-kind transfers, subsidies, and conditional cash transfer schemes. So in Malaysia, you have what I mentioned in last class, the Bantuan Rahmah, which used to be BREAM. They are cash transfers, which is a form of social assistance given by the government. So, like I mentioned, the most popular types of interventions for social assistance would look at unconditional cash transfer, like Bantuan Rahmah, conditional cash transfer, and school feeding programs. So, unconditional cash transfer represent regular cash transfers to household, and or individuals that aim to cover basic needs and support a basic standard of living. Conditional cash transfer are regular cash transfer to a household that aim to cover basic needs and support basic standard of living. Again, this is conditional. It depends on your, the type of household that you come from. So they started in Latin America in the late 1990s, and many countries have in place at least one scheme. Conditional cash transfers have been found to be very effective in reducing poverty and increasing use of services such as schooling and health services. Um, and then school feeding programs. So I think in the US at that time, and Malaysia also had this at one time also, the provision of food through schools, breakfast or lunch meals at schools, and take-home rations provided to children in school to take home. This is to provide basic level of nutrition and to incentivize children to go to school, especially the poor. And it can also promote local economy and agriculture if food is grown locally. Um, and school feeding programs are designed to increase school attendance and enrollment, as mentioned before. In India, they have what is called the midday meal scheme. It's the world's largest school meal program, reaching to more than 100 million students. And in Honduras, they have the homegrown school feeding program. And the World Food Program supports government to manage an innovative homegrown school feeding program. Okay, and then we move on to social insurance. Social insurance tag back to prevention, in that these programs aim to prevent people from falling into poverty, and to cope with shocks. So shocks include like illnesses, injury, unemployment, or in the case of farmers, drought. Social insurance are contributory, meaning you have to pay a portion of your salary into the scheme to be able to benefit. So for Malaysians, you would remember the SOCSO, where you contribute around 2 to 3% of your pay, if I'm not mistaken, to SOCSO. And if anything were to happen to you, you'll be able to benefit from the insurance. Okay, so this has been mentioned previously. You would see in formulations, SOCSO covers a lot of shocks, but in general, we'll discuss the insurance for old age. So old age insurance is to prevent income loss at old age. And this can include across the world, you will see social pensions, which consist of non-contributory benefits. Contributory pensions, combining contributions from employers and employees. This is in the form of the Employees Provident Fund savings formulations. Private pensions based on voluntary and private contributions, whatever that you've saved up, whether you annuitize it or take out from on a regular basis. So this would form what is the private pensions. There's also the health insurance, which include all or a combination of the following, which is a non-contributory scheme for vulnerable groups living in poverty, compulsory contributory scheme, and voluntary contributory scheme. Okay. So there are various other insurance schemes you would see across the world. There are the private insurance schemes, which you go out on your own and take up. There's the community-based insurance schemes. There's the community-based health insurance and funeral savings group. For Muslims, you have the Khairat Kematian, which is a form of a community-based insurance that will cover for funeral costs, to cover different type of shocks, yeah, all these insurance schemes. Okay, So this one is what had happened in COVID-19. I won't be covering much on this. Okay, and then labor market programs as interventions. They focus on people's productive capacities and to seek support for employment and integration back into the labor market. So this taps back to promoting people out of poverty and to make them able to be self-sufficient. So examples include graduation programs, skills training for youth, microfinance, and labor activation policies. So I think the Human Resource Ministry of our government is actually very active in looking at this, and it provides certification and courses for people to upskill and reduce unemployment in our country. So I will let you read this particular slide on your own. Okay, so labor market interventions. So you would see this egg-shaped graph here, in this diagram here, which highlights the wide range of labor market interventions that risk for those in work, ensuring strong labor standards and conditions. So you move from stage to stage, from guaranteed minimum to mandated to nudge incentivized and purely voluntary. Okay. So guaranteed minimum is subsidies to crowd in private investments for jobs. You will look at things like intermediation and employment assistance. I think this is something that SOCSO provides. I mean, for nations, if you were to find yourself unemployed, you can actually seek for assistance from SOCSO, where they would provide some kind of intermediation and employment assistance in finding you new work. You will also be covered for protection against catastrophic losses from dislocation, facilitation of social dialogue and industrial relations, and safeguard on freedoms of association and collective action. And then on on mandated and firm or individually financed, this would relate to having a minimum wage and what is actuarially fair unemployment income protection. So actuarially fair would tap back to your individual profile and the current economic situation that the country is facing. And then nudged incentivize. I'm sorry about this. This is actually tags back to nudge incentivize. Looks at profit and ownership sharing arrangements between worker and employers and employees. And finally, purely voluntary are any additional benefits beyond basic work contract that the employees get into. Okay, so these are the interventions in response to COVID, you would see. So, there are what we have covered in terms of formal social protection and informal forms, you would see. So formal social protection would look at interventions that are delivered by government, but also NGOs and civil society. They exist hand in hand with informal social protection. So informal could include more community-based support, such as funeral groups or savings and lending groups, but also loose forms such as families, in terms of remittances that you will receive, so on and so forth. Okay. So, this one is a very interesting look at case study, especially in Muslim societies, in the provision of zakat as a form of social protection. Zakat is mandated for Muslims as one of the 5 pillars of Islam. And here it's where Muslims give a portion of their wealth to charity. It is considered a religious duty for all adult Muslims with a minimum standard of wealth, where they have a formula of an amount that a Muslim should contribute to. And it can be undertaken informally, semi-formally, and formally. Informally is more towards communities living in largely non-Muslim country. So in some countries, collection of zakat is regulated and administered by the government, like in Malaysia. Government implemented mechanisms are usually in Muslim countries or Muslim majority countries, such as Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Malaysia. And the payment would be given to vulnerable groups where they have a list of people that are eligible to receive zakat payments. So in a way, it has become part of a social protection system in Muslim or Muslim majority countries. as well as Muslim communities. Okay, so that covers much of the type of social protection. So we look at what is happening around the world. It is considerably diverse, and it is very much related to the wealth of a country, from higher social investments to medium and lowest. And this dates back to the wealth a country has, across the spectrum. So by region, you see the types of social protection that people receive. You can observe different regional differences. Where in the poorest of the poor, such as in sub-Saharan Africa, 70% do not receive any transfer. They are not covered in any way. They are relegated to receiving social assistance, and the smallest proportion of people receiving social insurance. Okay, this is by region in 2015, where the limited number of social insurance assistance and active labor market programs are seen in places like West Asia, and a high proportion are seen in East Asia. So this is the percentage of people covered by at least one social protection benefit. Globally, the average is around 50%, but you see the least being in sub-Saharan Africa and the highest being in Europe. Okay. And the percentage of Asia and Pacific population covered by at least one social protection benefit, you see the lowest in India, but the highest is in Australia. So you see it takes back to the wealth of a country, really. Social assistance programs, you see higher in Europe, but the least in Sub-Saharan and South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. What the graph really shows is that on average, 60% of total population in Latin America and the Caribbean receive some form of social protection. You can see it here. And more than 3 or 4 out of 4 people belonging to the poorest quintile receive some kind of social protection. Okay. So this is social assistance across different regions around the world. You can see this for yourself. This is spending by types of social assistance. It shows that on average, countries in Latin America and the Caribbean spend the highest on conditional cash transfer. The graph also show that similar shares of spending on social assistance are allocated to social pension. But while it is there, I must also highlight to you that the implementation varies, which would relate to how it impacts the economy in this region. Okay. I will go fast across this because I believe this is something you would be able to read on your own accord. Looking at the last 2 decades, you see here, you can actually observe an overall increase in spending on social protection. And this relates back to the evolution of social protection thinking, as I mentioned earlier. With the latest framework being promulgated by UNICEF, ILO, and World Bank, people are taking note of this and are going back to their respective countries to enhance the social protection policies they currently have. For this graph, it shows the proportion of those in the poorest quintile covered by social insurance and other social protection interventions. The coverage is limited in low-income countries. Only 2% in the poorest quintile are covered. So you can see this for yourself, how it relates back to the country's wealth. So this graph shows the proportion of unemployed population that is covered by unemployment benefit. You can see this for yourself. Only 3 emerging economies have coverage rates above 30%. And there are a lot of room for improvement across countries here. This relates back to unemployment insurance. I've mentioned this somewhere. This keep on repeating itself. This is the SPF in Cambodia, which we've mentioned earlier. And in Myanmar, you would see, the description that Myanmar government has put in place that takes back to different dimensions of social protection, running from protection, prevention, promotion, and transformation. So I think that pretty much covers what the trend is like across countries. So, finally, before we wrap up, the idea is that across countries here, the idea and the is to actually cover the main groups of the population. Number one is the poor, to ensure that they come out from poverty and be full participants of economy, and the vulnerable, especially children, women, older people, people with disabilities, unemployed and the sick, to ensure that they are also given the right, social protection coverage, to ensure that their well-being is well kept, and also the marginalized, especially the minority groups and people living in very remote areas, to ensure that they can also become participants of society and the economy. So for social protection floor at this time, you would see many low and middle income countries are beginning to have that. And I think Malaysia is also in the process of adopting the SPF. And to finally be able to serve all the three functions, the three dimensions of social protection. Okay, so I think that is pretty much what is covered in our class this time. I will end my lecture here, and I hope if there are any questions, you will be able to ask me during class in the coming week 3, or you can also just WhatsApp me through our WhatsApp group. I'll be happy to look at the questions and discuss in the coming class. So that is all from me. Thank you very much. I hope to see you in the next class. Assalamualaikum and goodbye.